Welcome to the WRAL Daily Download. I'm Jack Hagel. School start times. If you're a parent, you build your morning around them. If you're a bleary-eyed student, the morning bell could significantly impact your performance. Wake County Schools, the biggest public school system in the state, recently revived a conversation around bell schedules. Should schools start earlier? Should they start later? WRAL education insider Emily Walkenhorst has been following the debate, and she joins us now. Emily, welcome back.
Good to be here.
Before we get into the strong opinions on bell schedules, just give us a quick overview of where things stand in Wake County.
So in Wake County, currently high schools start around 7:25 a.m. They're done by just after 2 p.m. Middle school starts after 8 o'clock. They end around 3. And elementary schools start after 9 and ends, closer to 4. So that's the current setup in Wake County, and that's pretty uniform across the schools.
And does that align with what Wake County students and parents want? I understand the county recently surveyed them. What did the survey results show?
So the survey results were mixed in a lot of cases. When basically the survey was asking people to compare the current schedule against a theoretical alternative schedule that basically flipped elementary and high school. It didn't exactly flip them, but mostly flipped them and kept middle school about the same. And, there was overwhelming favor for the alternative schedule, so starting high schools later and elementary schools earlier in terms of student academic performance, in terms of student health, in terms of all kinds of things. So it was something parents, staff, and students just overwhelmingly believed the alternative schedule would benefit them. Where it got a little bit mixed was if you asked people about extracurricular activities. So high school students overwhelmingly said that change they feared would negatively impact their extracurriculars because it's just kind of, where do you put them? Do you put them before school? Do you put them after school? How late does that make you? And perhaps it could negatively impact their work schedules, depending on what their job is. Parents and staff were less negative toward those things. And in fact, in most cases, there wasn't really a majority opposed to change. So when most questions were posed, a majority of people either said they would benefit from a change or they didn't think a change would impact them at all.
So why not just make those changes? If it makes sense to swap elementary school and high school, why doesn't the county just make that fix?
So there are a couple of reasons. One, you might still be concerned about public opinion because maybe most people didn't say that a new schedule would negatively benefit them. There are still some people who were like, I don't know, or I don't think it would probably have an impact, but nobody really knows until you actually experience it. So it's a matter of, if you were to change it, you would want that transition to go pretty smoothly. And then that kind of brings in the other complication, which is, how do you actually pull it off? When you think about bus driver schedules, well, how many bus drivers do you need for high schools? How many do you need for elementary schools? How does that change the types of routes they do? Right now, there's some uncertainty with elementary school buses in getting to schools on time. A lot of those drivers are starting with high schools. And then, maybe the bus for the elementary school is late. And so you would kind of be shifting some of that uncertainty from elementary schools to high schools. So there's a personnel consideration, but then you also have to think, well, if most of these high school students are worried about how this change would impact their extracurricular activities, well, how do you find a way to minimize that impact? What do you think that change would be? Because if you were to move extracurriculars to before school, that might defeat the purpose for some of those students.
And is there a staffing issue as well, in addition to sort of an existing personnel issue?
So it would depend on the approach that you chose. So it seems like, most people would be okay with an 8:30 a.m. start time to ending just after 3 p.m. And that could be a good compromise. If you have, if you're a parent and your middle school or high school child might watch their elementary sibling after school, you might want them to get out of school at about the same time. So, But to make that happen, you would need to hire a lot more bus drivers. I mean, dozens more bus drivers. And currently, that's just a challenge in the county. They're short, over 200 bus drivers from where they're actually staffed for.
Well, let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll talk about how bell schedules can affect student performance. Stick around. Welcome back to the WRAL Daily Download. We're talking with WRAL Education Insider Emily Walkenhorst about Wake County's debate over school start times. Emily, Wake's start times have been in place for years. Why is this discussion happening now?
So the school system has been talking about this on and off for a few years now. Basically, there's research out there, numerous studies that have shown that a later start time for high school students would be very beneficial to them. Most of the research is really focused around middle school and high school students because the research shows that when you hit puberty, your internal clock kind of shifts. And so suddenly you want to go to bed later, but you still require 8 to 10 hours of sleep. So then you want to wake up later. And so students who have, sufficient amounts of sleep tend to do better academically. They tend to be less irritable in the morning. And there are just a lot of benefits to getting sufficient sleep. So the idea is if students were starting later, if high school students were starting later, it would be easier for them to get that sleep. If they're not going to go to bed on time and, to actually wake up as early as they need to for a 7:25 a.m. start, maybe we move the start time and they can get more sleep and they'll do better academically.
Has Wake County tried to tinker with these schedules at all, just as an experiment?
So a handful of years ago, they changed the start times to be a little bit later at a handful of high schools, and they thought it really improved students' academics. So that was another reason they felt positively about the idea that, maybe students, really could benefit from these changes more broadly.
That all seems to make sense. Are there any drawbacks to changing these times?
So it really just comes down to how the school system ends up deciding to schedule all of the schools. So when you talk about flipping high school and elementary school, that's a lot of adjustments that parents have to make, and then workplaces have to realize that those changes are happening. And maybe you need to worry about different types of childcare being available at different times. And then there's also, the conversation that certain times of year, if elementary students are starting at 7:25 a.m., they might have to walk to a bus stop in the dark, or maybe if they walk to school, they might have to walk when it's, it'll probably be light out, but, just kind of beginning light out. And, so there's kind of a question of, how many parents would feel comfortable with that. Maybe the parent would suddenly start walking to the bus stop with their kid. And there's just a lot of things to think about. Ultimately, it comes down to the plan that's adopted and how easy it is for people to adjust to.
Now, Wake can't be the only school system chewing on this issue. What have other districts done? Any in the Triangle?
So there's been a movement, with recommendations being made by national groups, over the last several years, hey, we need to start high schools a little bit later, like at least by 8:30, no earlier than 8:30 a.m. So there have been school systems across the nation taking stock of that. And some have actually made the shift. Notably, one of Wake County's neighbors, Durham Public Schools, made that shift a handful of years ago, where what they did is they had elementary schools start just after 7 a.m. and high schools now start, I believe, around 9:15 a.m.
And what has Durham found with its changes?
So at first, back in 2017, when they started making these changes, there was a little bit of, frustration around it. They did a survey, and a lot of parents, there was just an adjustment period. Most parents, I believe it was just over 50%, said, we really prefer, the old schedule. So there was clearly an adjustment period, but the school system stuck with it. And, several years later, they're still starting at those same times.
So what happens next for Wake County? Is there any plan on the table to make these changes, or is it just talk?
I think there's definitely a desire to come up with a plan, but there's no specific one on the table. So the next step for the school system is to talk about the survey results with the school board. That'll occur at an upcoming, probably a work session before the next school board meeting. And they'll just kind of go over what the results say and, what they really want to do next. So the school system has said, we can come up with a handful of options of when we can start these different levels of schools, if we should swap these times, if maybe we should do something a little bit different, maybe high school, instead of totally swapping, maybe high school still starts a little bit earlier or something like that. And, then the school board would review any of those proposals and they'd ultimately decide if any of them were feasible. And that's also a measurement that the school system is going to do. They're not going to propose something most likely that they absolutely know they do not have the staffing to pull off. So that's basically what's next, is they're going to discuss the results and use that to guide a proposal they might actually want to make. Nothing will change for next year. The earliest any start times would change would be for the 2024-25 school year. And that's ultimately, if everybody agrees that there's actually a plan worth pursuing.
Well, I'm sure you'll keep us up to speed if changes happen. Thanks, Emily.
Great to be here.
That's WRAL Education Insider Emily Walkenhorst for her recent reporting on the debate over Wake County's bell schedule. Visit the education section of WRAL.com. I'm Jack Hagel. Thanks for joining us, and thanks for listening to the WRAL Daily Download and for making us part of your morning routine. Another great way to get WRAL news is the Morning Briefing newsletter. It's a daily email with Triangle news, events, and headlines to help you get ready for the day. Sign up at WRAL.com/newsletter.